The wind had teeth. It dragged across the high plain like a thing starved, clawing at the hem of her coat and biting through the thin cotton wrapped around her child. Her face was raw from it, red as if scraped, and her boots, 3 sizes too big and stuffed with rags, slid on the frost-hardened earth. The baby stirred against her chest, whimpered, and she pressed her cracked lips to his brow. All around them was that same white silence, the land blanketed in snow-scrub grass, frozen stiff and brittle, the sky low and colorless like ash held in a cold oven. She could not see the town anymore. It had shrunk behind her, left behind like everything else. She didn't know where she was going now, only that she couldn't stand at that door another second, couldn't take another "no ma'am." Not here. Not tonight. Her fingers had gone blue when she reached the last fence post. The child was barely breathing, his cry gone thin and hollow. She gritted her teeth and kept walking. The house came into view like a trick of the land, a dark shape hunched against a grove of wind-beaten cottonwood. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and steady. She smelled cedar and faint meat fat, and her knees nearly gave beneath her. One more door, she thought. Just one. She lifted her hand to knock, but her knuckles had stiffened with cold. She had to use the heel of her hand instead. Once. Twice. No sound came from within. She almost turned away. Then the door creaked open. A man filled the frame, tall, broad across the shoulders, his beard unkempt and flecked with hay. Behind him, lamplight threw long shadows. His eyes didn't widen at the sight of her. They narrowed slow and steady, taking her in like a puzzle he didn't much care to solve. She forced out a whisper. "Please. Just a night." His gaze dropped to the bundle clutched to her chest. She loosened the shawl just enough for him to see the baby's face. Pale. Sleeping or worse. The man stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The heat hit her like a slap. It brought tears to her eyes. The room was simple, wood stove near the center, rough planked floor, a cot along the far wall. A table with one chair. A kettle hissed softly. He shut the door behind her without a word. "Sit." He pointed to the stool near the stove. "Warm the child." She did. Her hands shook as she peeled back the layers of cloth. The baby's skin was waxen, but as the warmth touched him, he stirred, squirmed, gave a faint cry. Relief bent her shoulders forward. She closed her eyes. Just for a moment. "You walked far?" the man asked. "Town turned me out." Her voice cracked. "They said no room." He didn't answer. Just stood there watching, arms crossed, his shadow shifting as the fire popped in the stove. He had hard eyes, but not cruel ones. "What's his name?" he asked after a while. "Samuel." "And you?" "Margaret." She kept her chin high. He nodded once. "There's stew left. I'll get it." He moved with quiet efficiency, ladling broth and meat into a tin bowl. He handed it to her with a spoon worn thin from use. She took it with both hands, grateful and ashamed. "You got others?" he asked. Her face twisted. She nodded. "3. Left with neighbors 2 counties east. I was trying to get to 'em. You aim to walk the rest of the way." "I didn't think it through," she said. "I just left." He didn't call her foolish. Didn't ask questions he had no business asking. He watched her eat, then gave her a blanket from a trunk in the corner. The cot was his, but he didn't offer it. She understood. "You can stay the night," he said. "No more promises than that." She nodded. He went to the table, took out a long knife, and began whittling a piece of dry pine, quiet as the snow settling outside. Margaret curled on the floor near the stove, baby tucked close. The heat seeped into her bones, brought back the ache of hunger, the sting of lost pride. But the boy breathed steady now, and she was still alive. She closed her eyes and let the sound of the blade shaving wood be the last thing she heard. The storm had passed by morning. Snow still clung to the eaves, but the sky had softened to a pale blue. Sunlight slid across the window like a quiet apology, and the room smelled of smoke iron and something faintly sweet, oats maybe. Margaret stirred before the baby, stiff from the floor, every joint aching like rusted hinges. The man was already up. She heard the scrape of a chair, the sound of boots on planks, the dull thud of a kettle being moved. He didn't speak when she stood, only motioned toward a tin cup on the table. Steam rose from it. "Coffee," he said. "Sit." She hesitated. Then she sat. "Thank you," she said, voice low. He nodded once and sat across from her, elbows on the table, hands around his own cup. For a long minute there was only the sound of the wind outside and the fire snapping in the stove. "Baby's warmer," he said. "Color's back." "Yes." Her fingers curled around the cup. "Thank you for last night." "You already said that." "I mean it." He shrugged. "No sense letting a woman freeze with a child in her arms." She looked down at her hands. The skin had cracked across, two knuckles deep enough to sting when she flexed them. The coffee tasted burnt and bitter, but it woke something in her. He studied her, not unkindly. "You plan on staying?" "I don't plan much anymore," she said. "Plans haven't been kind to me." He didn't argue, just stood and started pulling on his coat. "I'll be out in the barn," he said. "You can use the water pump out back if you need." She watched him go, watched the door close behind him. For a moment she just sat there, listening to the echo of her own breath in that quiet house. Then she stood, wrapped the blanket tighter around Samuel, and stepped outside. The cold hit her like a warning, sharp and fast, but it wasn't the same as the night before. The air was clearer now, the sky wide and blue, and the snow glittered like something clean. Her boots sank as she crossed to the pump. She worked the handle, teeth clenched, until water came slow and sputtering. She washed her face in it, then Samuel's, then wiped her hands on her skirt. The barn doors were open. She stepped inside. The smell hit first: hay, dung, sweat, old wood. The man was pitching straw into a stall. Two horses watched her from the far side, tails flicking. A goat bleated somewhere near the back. "You work stock before?" he asked, not looking at her. "Yes," she said, setting Samuel in a feed sack she'd lined with her shawl. "My husband, he ran a team out of Kansas. When he came back from the war, we moved west. He died 2 winters ago. Fever." The man paused, leaned on the pitchfork. "You got a name for me yet?" She blinked. "Margaret. I meant for me. Most folks call me Webb." She nodded. "Webb. You want to earn your keep, you can muck that far stall," he said. "Goat'll kick if she don't like you. You'll know soon enough." She didn't hesitate. She picked up the rake by the door, stepped into the stall, and went to work. By midday her arms burned, her back ached, and her palms were rubbed raw. But when Webb handed her a tin plate with a biscuit and a strip of salt pork, he didn't look at her like charity. He looked at her like someone pulling her own weight. "Baby sleepin'?" he asked. "Like a rock." "Good. He'll need it." They ate in silence. The wind had died down. She could hear birds now faint in the trees. Webb leaned back in his chair, eyes on the window. "I don't keep company. Not for long." She nodded. "I'm not looking to stay where I'm not wanted." "You're not unwanted." Just he paused. "I got used to being alone." Margaret looked at him, then really looked. He had the hands of a man who built and broke things. Eyes like he'd seen too much and remembered it all. A thin scar ran from his temple to the line of his beard. "I got used to leaving," she said. They didn't speak after that. But the silence felt different. Not empty, just waiting. The trail grows quieter, but not empty. Subscribe. The days fell into a rhythm, the kind that didn't ask permission. Margaret rose with the dark, the air still heavy with night cold. She wrapped Samuel tight and tied him to her chest with her shawl, then stepped into the work like it was something she owed the ground itself. Hauling water, feeding stock, sweeping the porch. Webb never told her what to do exactly, just left the shed door open, tools leaned where she'd find them. That was his way. He didn't talk much, but she came to learn the sounds of him, the thump of boots crossing the porch, the long creak of the barn doors at dawn, the sound he made in his throat when a saddle strap slipped through his fingers. He was a man of plain habits, like the land itself, hard, honest, and not easily moved. One afternoon, after she'd washed Samuel with melted snow and tucked him in the sun near the window, Margaret found herself splitting kindling by the stump. Her hands were blistered thumb wrapped in an old scrap of cotton. The hatchet bit deep into the wood, sharp and sure. She paused only when she heard the soft crunch of boots behind her. "You split like someone taught you," Webb said. "I told you. My husband ran teams. When he was gone, I did most everything else." He nodded but didn't leave. Just stood there, arms folded, eyes on the edge of the tree line where crows circled. "You always this quiet?" she asked. He gave a half shrug. "Talk don't get the firewood chopped." She looked down at the axe in her hand. "Sometimes it helps, though." Webb exhaled through his nose. "Maybe." Never been much for filling silences. She sat on the stump, wiping her brow. "You got family?" He didn't answer right away. "Then had a brother. Died in the Snake River flood back in '89. Mother passed before that. Father was a drunk who took off before I could grow a mustache." She didn't flinch. She just nodded. "I had a sister," she said. "Younger. Ran off with a traveling preacher when she was 16. I haven't heard from her since." "Preachers," Webb muttered. "Men with answers and no roots," she said. She liked that kind. They sat a while in the fading light, the sky turning gold behind the trees. Samuel's soft breath drifted through the open window. Somewhere out beyond the ridge a coyote called. "You gonna keep heading east?" he asked. She didn't know how to answer. Her mouth opened, then closed. "I don't know," she said finally. "I want my other children back. I want them somewhere safe, warm. But I'm tired, Webb. I'm tired of knocking on doors." He looked at her, then really looked. Not with pity, but with something quieter. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "You could stay through spring," he said. "Helps short in calving season." She studied his face. The set of his jaw. The quiet offer behind the words. "I'd pull my weight," she said. "I know. And Samuel." He didn't hesitate. "He stays too." She nodded, then looked away so he wouldn't see what it meant to her. The sky darkened. The last light died in the trees. That night, after she fed Samuel and tucked him in the cot, Margaret sat by the stove mending one of Webb's shirts. It had torn along the seam, worn thin at the elbow. She worked by lamplight, small, even stitches. Her hands remembered the motion. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her to fix something that mattered. Webb sat at the table writing in a small, weather-stained ledger. He didn't say anything, but when she slid the mended shirt onto the table beside him, he looked up and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said. And that was all. But it felt like something more. Come March, the thaw began. Not with fanfare, but with the slow dripping of snowmelt from the roof, the quiet rot of ice loosening its grip on the earth. The wind still held its bite, but the sun stayed longer in the sky. Shoots of stubborn green pushed through mud near the barn steps, and the horses grew restless, nostrils flaring at the scent of new air. Margaret felt it too deep in her bones, that shift, that wanting. She woke earlier now, often before Webb. She'd stand on the porch in the half-light, Samuel bundled against her, and watch the mist lift from the pasture like breath off a sleeping animal. These mornings she remembered herself not the desperate woman who'd knocked at a stranger's door, but the one who used to sing to her children while kneading bread, who could fix a torn hem by feel alone, who'd once laughed so hard she'd spilled a whole pail of milk. Webb had begun leaving her things: a pair of leather gloves on the hook by the door, a tin cup carved with a small W, a coat that didn't fit perfectly but held its warmth. He never mentioned them, just left them where she'd find them. One afternoon she found him in the barn brushing the bay mare. He moved slow, with a kind of reverence, like the animal was something sacred. "She's pregnant," he said, seeing her in the doorway. "Due in a few weeks." Margaret stepped in her boots, leaving soft tracks in the straw. "You raise horses?" "Just a few. Enough to sell to the army out of Fort Keogh come summer." "She's beautiful," Margaret said, reaching out to touch the mare's shoulder. The animal shivered under her palm, then settled. Webb didn't look at her when he spoke next. "My mother had a voice like yours," he said, "soft but steady. She used to read scripture out loud when it stormed. Said it calmed the cattle." Margaret smiled. "My oldest boy, James, he was born in a storm. I read to him too. Not scripture, stories. You miss 'em." She swallowed. "Every hour I'm breathing." He nodded, then turned to her. "You said they were with neighbors?" "Yes. A family near Miles City. I left them when I couldn't feed them no more. I thought if I found work I'd send for them." Webb set down the brush. "Then we'll bring them here." She stared at him. "What?" "Come spring, I'll take the wagon. You'll ride along. We'll bring your children home." Her lips parted, but no words came. It was too much. Too big. No one had said "we" in a long time. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know." A long silence passed between them, filled with the sound of the mare chewing hay and the wind brushing against the slats of the barn. "Why?" she asked. He leaned on the stall door, eyes unreadable. "Because I'd want someone to do the same for me." She looked down at her hands, calloused now, rough with work. She thought of James, of Eliza's dimples, of little Robert's laugh. The baby stirred against her chest, and she pressed her hand to his back. "Thank you," she whispered. Webb didn't reply, just gave a quiet nod and went back to brushing the mare. That night she baked biscuits, the kind her mother used to make with lard and flour and a pinch of salt. The smell filled the house. Webb ate 2, then 3, and said nothing, but she caught him watching her over the rim of his cup, something unreadable softening the lines around his eyes. They didn't speak of it again, but she knew the plan held. It lived between them now, solid and sure, as the ground beginning to thaw beneath their feet. Spring came like a slow confession. The last of the snow melted into the thirsty ground, leaving the yard soft and rutted. Birds returned their songs, thin and sharp, in the early mornings. Calves dropped in the pasture one after another, slick with afterbirth and steam rising off their backs in the cool air. Margaret helped pull 2 of them. Webb handed her the ropes without hesitation. She no longer asked what she was allowed to do. By April, Samuel could sit up on his own. His cheeks were full and pink again, his grip strong. He laughed now, real belly-deep laughter that filled the little house and made Webb glance over from whatever he was doing just for a moment, like he'd forgotten the sound of joy. One evening she found Webb in the shed, bent over the wagon. He had the wheels pulled off and laid out in parts, each one scrubbed and checked for cracks. She stood at the threshold, arms folded. "You always this thorough?" she asked. He looked up. "Road to Miles City's rough. Ain't gonna risk breaking down halfway there." She walked in, knelt beside him. "I could sew up a tarp." Keep the wind off the children on the ride back." He handed her a wrench without needing to ask. "Good. We leave in 5 days." It was real then. Not a kindness he'd forget or walk back. It was happening. They worked side by side for hours. The lantern burned low. Webb wiped his hands on a rag and leaned back against the wall. "You ever think about what comes after?" he asked. She didn't look at him right away. Just picked up the rag he'd set down and folded it slowly. "After the children are here." He nodded. "I do," she said. "But I don't trust hope the way I used to. It's slippery. Cuts when you hold it too long." "I ain't asking for promises," he said. "Just wondering if you've got any want left in you, after all that happened." She turned her head, met his gaze. It wasn't a romantic look. It wasn't even soft. Just open. Honest. "I do," she said. "It's buried deep, but I do." Webb nodded like that was enough. And for both of them it was. The morning they left, the sky was clean and high. Margaret packed bread-salted meat and a tin of honey Webb had kept tucked away. Samuel lay curled in a sling against her chest, blinking up at the light. Webb hitched the team without a word, just checked each strap, each buckle. He climbed up and offered his hand. She took it. They rode for hours through flatland and low hills, the wagon wheels creaking under them. No towns, just open land, dry and stretching. They camped off the trail that night, ate cold beans from a tin. Margaret lit a small fire and rocked Samuel while Webb leaned against the wheel and watched the stars. He spoke softly, as if the dark made it easier. "I used to think I was meant to be alone. After my brother died, I figured I'd used up whatever luck I had." She didn't answer, just listened. "But then you showed up with that child in your arms," he said, "and I remembered not everything that comes to your door is a burden." She stared at the fire, throat tight. "I thought I'd worn out my welcome everywhere." "You didn't hear." The wind shifted. Coyotes howled in the distance. She looked up at him. "Webb, Ebb." "Yeah." "I'm not just bringing back my children," she said. "I'm bringing back myself." He didn't smile, but she saw something settle in his chest, like a long-held breath released. "I figured," he said. They sat in silence after that. The stars wheeled overhead, slow and steady. Samuel stirred and sighed in his sleep. Margaret wrapped the blanket tighter around him, then leaned back against the wagon beside Webb. Neither of them spoke again that night, but they didn't need to. They reached Miles City on the 4th day. It sat low and brown against the plains, still drying from spring thaw, the streets rutted and slick with old mud. The buildings looked smaller than Margaret remembered, worn down by weather and time. A line of wash fluttered behind the boarding house. The church bell rang somewhere out of sight. She sat upright on the wagon seat, hands clenched in her lap. Webb guided the team without a word. He didn't press her. He hadn't the whole ride. The house stood at the edge of town, whitewashed once, now peeled to gray, the porch half sunken. A woman opened the door as they pulled up, wide-hipped with a hard face and red hands. She squinted into the sun, then wiped her palms on her apron and stepped down. "Margaret," the woman said, and not warmly. Margaret climbed down slowly, legs aching from the ride. "I've come for my children." "They're inside," the woman said, glancing past her to Webb. "They've been fed. We did our part." "I know," Margaret said, "and I'm grateful." "They'll need boots," the woman added. "James outgrew his, and Eliza's toes poke through." "I'll see to it." There was a silence, thick and plain. Then the woman turned and went back inside. Webb stood near the horses, giving her space. Margaret took a breath and stepped through the doorway. The smell hit her first: coal smoke, boiled potatoes, damp wool. Then the sound of soft voices and feet on wood. Her heart thundered. James was first to appear, 8 years old now, taller than she remembered, hair longer. He stared at her with something caught between disbelief and longing. "Ma!" She dropped to her knees. He ran into her arms, burying his face in her neck. Then came Eliza, round-faced and blinking back tears, and Robert, smaller, uncertain, holding his sister's hand. Margaret gathered them all and sobbing without shame. "I came back," she whispered into their hair. "I told you I would." The ride home was quieter. The children, exhausted from reunion and confusion, lay bundled in the back beneath thick quilts. Samuel gurgled in Margaret's lap. She watched the land pass, as if seeing it new again. Webb drove, one hand steady on the reins, eyes forward. At a creek crossing he finally spoke. "They'll be safe now." Margaret looked at him. "Because of you." He shook his head. "Because of you. You kept walking, you never gave up." She didn't answer right away, just rested her hand lightly on his arm. He didn't flinch. That night they camped in a cottonwood grove. Webb built a fire while James helped Eliza wash her hands in the stream. Robert chased moths through the brush. Margaret sat with Samuel in her lap and looked across the flames at the man who had opened his door when no one else would. "Webb," she said. He looked up. "When we get back, do you want us to stay?" He didn't blink. "Yes." "All of us?" He nodded. "All of you." Her voice trembled. "And you don't mind the noise, the mess?" "I've lived too long in silence," he said. "I think I'm ready for the noise." She smiled, then, full and sure, the first in a long while. The fire crackled between them, bright and alive. When they reached the ranch 2 days later, Webb carried Eliza inside while Margaret unpacked the wagon. James helped Robert down and pointed out the barn, the horses, the patch of land where vegetables could grow. Samuel slept against Margaret's chest. Webb stood on the porch, arms folded, watching them. Not as a stranger. Not anymore. As Margaret stepped up beside him, he reached for her hand. Rough palm against rough palm. "We'll build something here," he said. "If you want to." "I do." She looked out over the land, the fields greening, the sky wide and full of promise. Her children laughed in the distance. The wind, for once, was warm. They had nothing fancy. No rings. No ceremony. Just hands joined. Children fed. A fire inside, and the strength to begin again. If this story lingered, subscribe and let it grow.